I have to have my snacks. Snacks for just when I feel like snacking.
Just leave me some ammo, a little water, some chips if you have them.
Welcome to Rebel Road Snacks, our tasty little episodes. I'm Haley.
And I'm Mary. Thank you for joining us today from wherever or whatever time it is. Hello.
Yes, hello friends. How is life treating you? Are you doing okay? Mary and I certainly hope life is going well, and if it's not, take heart. All the dark and upside down that the supernatural can bring, it can also bring some curious wonder and joy.
It sure can, and I think our little story today will make our listeners smile. It's a good one. So Haley, let's just jump right in today.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. "173 miles above the surface of the Earth, our atmosphere begins to thin, and the sky turns from the familiar blue to a darkness we have come to call space. There, in the quiet and solitude of the beginning edges of Earth's atmosphere, the Salyut 7 space station was home to 3 cosmonauts. The men were 156 days into the 237 day of their long-term space station mission. The year was 1984, and the Soviet Union was the only nation who had a functional space station. The U.S. may have claimed to walk on the moon, but the Soviet Union was the only nation brave enough to live up there.
It was July 12th. All operations were normal. The men were in good spirits, running tests, logging data. At a little over 5 months in, the wonder of 16 sunsets and 16 sunrises in a single day was still a sight to behold. It never grew old. The men were thriving. So instantly, the men became alarmed when a warm, penetrating orange glow began to surround their ship. The men at first feared it was a gas leak or explosion, but on instrument inspection and visual inspections, they realized the glow was not coming from inside, but from outside. It was a cloud. A mysterious glowing orange cloud had enveloped their spacecraft and was now coalescing into a shape. The men watched, hearts racing, eyes trying to process what was happening. Suddenly, the light became so intense it permeated the opaque walls and blinded the men. Even with their eyes closed tight, they still saw the orange glow. As the minutes passed, the men's eyesight began to return, and they were astonished by what they could see. Outside, floating in space, they saw faces in the port windows, smiling and humanoid, towering beings wrapped in light.
All 3 men watched as 7 beings of light surrounded their craft. The beings' eyes locked onto the crew. The cosmonauts were motionless, overwhelmed. Shining brighter than the stars, the beings of light stayed with their spacecraft for 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, 3 men watched and observed what they could only describe as angels surround their spacecraft, and slowly they faded into the darkness. The beings of light were described as over 80 feet tall, glowing with enormous wings and what appeared to be halos. As the beings kept pace with their space station, they slowly faded back into the dark, only to return. Just 12 days later, a second crew joined the cosmonauts, and the beings of light returned. The spacecraft grew orange, so intense and blinding, once again piercing the walls of the spacecraft, and outside, the enormous glowing beings of light and giant wings began to appear, with smiling, human-like faces. All 6 cosmonauts reported a deep sense of peace and joy in their presence. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared before, they faded once more into the dark.
Space angels. What do you think, Haley? Did they really see something?
Yeah, well, 6 people saw the same thing, and 3 of those 6 saw it twice. So I don't know, Mary. They certainly saw something, and I think they could have possibly seen some real angels.
I agree. Now, what did they see? I don't know. But this was in 1984. There was absolutely no other space station orbiting the Earth. So, could a few angels have been a little curious? There's no bit in history or in that story that said the ship had failures or the men had became instantly afraid. So, I think from the initial shock of, holy crap, there's things outside the ship, it became, oh, wow, there's things outside this ship.
Yeah, that would have been something very interesting to see. You're floating up there, you're not in space because we all learned from our moon landing episode that space is further away than what we all know. You're in this darkness, the stars are brighter, the sun can be crazy intense, and imagine you watch the sunrise and sunset like 16 times when you're in a space station. And then all of a sudden, wow, this warm orange glow, it just seems to fill the ship. And then you realize it's so intense that it's outside the ship. It's kind of like, wow. But I am going to say, I think I would probably scream a little. Definitely would be a jump scare if I floated over to the window in the spacecraft and saw a humanoid face smiling at me.
I totally would jump scare at that too. Now, this was the Soviet Union, so they had an explanation for what the cosmonauts had said they had seen. Do you want to hear it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the official response was a mass hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation and pressure fluctuations. So that happened not once, but twice. And you'd think you'd stop sending people up there if that sort of thing kept happening. But then again, remember the dog they sent into space? She died when she came back.
Yeah, maybe that's why those beings were peeking in. Imagine, they're up there and they're like, oh, I wonder if they have another dog with them.
Maybe they were making sure they weren't going to shoot another dog down to die. They were checking the sustainability out of that space station there.
Well, we are on a completely different side road in today's episode, but friends, go to your local shelter and save a dog. If you can't have a dog, find a local shelter and see if they could use anything. Donate some dog food or some old blankets. I know I'm always bringing a blanket after blanket home, and then I have an abundance. So, donate those old ones to the shelters. The rescues and the shelter folks, they certainly could use some angels of their own.
Absolutely. Very true and very noble, Haley. Excellent advice.
Oh, thanks. And, we love our pups around here, but back to the space angels. Mary, have they been seen since?
I don't think so. There is some chatter that the cosmonauts did see them, or they still see them, but they don't report them. The Soviet Union, it was scary. It was a very scary nation. It was a no nonsense country. So if you whispered about that thing, chances are you'd get put on inactive duty for mental incompetence. And they did have all the cosmonauts tested mentally and everybody checked out. So there were no mental health issues with them. Now, in 2022, an Italian astronaut, Samantha Cristoforetti, photographed a ghostly wing shaped being right outside the International Space Station. But you know how science likes to demystify the supernatural. They say that this sighting was confirmed to be a completely natural phenomenon. The thermal trail and exhaust plume of the arriving Soyuz spacecraft. So I'll post that photo and you can see the angel shape, but I really don't think that this is what those cosmonauts were talking about. And when you look at this photo, I think you'll agree with me.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Mary. It's not as vivid as what our cosmonauts described. And I also agree that maybe since man had not been in space for that long ever before, this one was, we were 150 days in, you know, perhaps the beings up there were thinking, what are they doing? Do they need help? Let's go check it out.
Yeah, I don't know. And sometimes I think it is okay to not know everything. A little mystery in life, it's always good. I know we're trying to answer questions and figure things out, but sometimes a little mystery is good to keep in our lives.
It kind of makes you wonder what other things astronauts might not be allowed to say or even speak on regarding what they've seen. I mean, Have you heard about the knocking that the Chinese astronauts experience?
Yeah, and I absolutely love how China responded to that, actually. Go ahead and tell that story. Our listeners might not have heard that.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, just let me explain. So, in 2003, there was an astronaut by the name of Yang Luai. Apologize if I'm saying his name wrong, but he did his first historic solo mission for China, and he experienced some really eerie intermittent banging on his craft. Now, again, these are not men that are prone to paranoia. So he checks out everything. He's floating around trying to find the source of this knocking. And think about that. You're up there, you're in a solo mission. That has to be nerve wracking on a whole new level. So he checked everywhere, looked outside, no source. He described it as someone knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. And there was purpose to it, but no explanations were made. So China, in response, it took 100 billion% seriously to address this. They tore the rocket apart, tried to figure it out, and they could not. So what did they do? They added it to their training and simply say, you may experience knocking, and we don't know what it is.
Right? I love that they weren't like, oh, he's crazy and tried to write it off. They were like, he's not crazy. We know our men. We've torn the ship apart. Something was making knocking noises. And so they were like, okay, to all of our new astronauts coming in, you may experience these knocking noises. And they had guesses onto what it is, but the guesses all created like a rhythmic knocking. And the knocking that Yang heard, astronaut Yang, would be like almost a taunt, creepy. But he wasn't the only one that ever experienced that knocking. Other Chinese astronauts also reported experiencing it. And their best guess, the Chinese scientists' best guess, was that it's the expanding and the contracting of metal, but that in no way sounds like a wooden hammer beating on an iron bucket, you know? So, but they're kind of like, no, it's a knock. All the astronauts out there were kind of like, no, it's definitely a knock. Like, hi, are you in there? Creepy.
I certainly would take a beam of light that I can see over a little potential space gremlin knocking on the outside of the spaceship. It's kind of like it's wanting to be invited. And I would say, no, thank you to that. Please go away.
Right? You never let it in. Pull up your doormats that say welcome, everybody. You're just asking for it.
Yeah, good little side note there. That makes me think, Mary, of the black-eyed kids. Never let them in. And listeners, if you aren't familiar with the black-eyed kids, then you are certainly going to want to tune in next week, where Mary and I are going to be discussing all things black-eyed kids.
Yes, creepy children.
Well, some kids are creepy without the black eyes.
So true. And we apologize to all the children out there. But
well, until next week, I hope everyone enjoyed this little episode on space angels. And what do you think? Were they angels or just space vapor? And what is knocking on Chinese spaceships? Let us know.
And as always, if you love this podcast, like this podcast, or listen just because it popped up, hit that follow button. It doesn't cost anything, but it sure does help us. So until next week, everyone.
Keep it weird, and when it just gets too weird, pull it back to Jesus.
Bye.
Bye.